confidence in the economy, and you can see that the markets have stabilised, the pound has stabilised.
He's the would-be Prime Minister, but does Boris know what's going on? Osborne and Cameron fiddle whilst Britain's EU membership burns. Both speak for the first time in 3 days, but did they say anything? Good evening from Westminster. Tonight we are live with Channel 4 News for 90 minutes. Britain adrift amid the most serious constitutional crisis in nearly 200 years. So many questions, so few answers. Neither the Chancellor nor the Prime Minister have been able to chart a route forward, and there seems little evidence that anyone beyond the Bank of England has made much of a plan at all as to what happens next. In the last few minutes, the ratings agency Standard & Poor's has slashed Britain's credit rating and warned that it could cut it again. Tonight, we examine the chaos as the government struggles to regain traction and the opposition explodes with 3/4 of the shadow cabinet quitting Mr Corbyn's lineup. We're with Nigel Farage, 100 years after the carnage on the Somme. After fighting for decades for Brexit, he's worried his victory today is being watered down. Corbynistas have gathered in front of Parliament as Labour MPs meet in the Commons to debate Mr Corbyn's very fate. We'll be bringing you the result live.
Also tonight, I'm in Berlin, where the leaders of Germany, France and Italy, the remaining big three of the EU, tell Britain to finalise divorce. Beyond the public show of unity, there are fundamental differences, though, about the speed of Britain's departure and how to reboot Europe.
For me, for my age, for my knowledge now, it's the worst what happened.
I think the whole project of you is about to shatter if we're acting too quick right now.
Undercover with some of our continental ambassadors, shocking footage shows the worst of England's football fans.
Here in the UK, we've gathered people who voted for and against Brexit to debate what next for Britain. This as police say there's been a rise in the number of hate crimes reported since the referendum.
Speak proper English then.
We've been talking to victims of racism and xenophobic abuse about their fears for the country where they live and work. And why did swathes of Northern England vote to leave the EU? We're in Hartlepool, where some are jubilant that at last Westminster has been forced to act on their concerns about immigration and jobs.
Are you expecting Brexit to deliver jobs for you, for Hartlepool?
Yeah, so right. I'm hoping to bring the factories back and the hospital back as well.
For anyone who held out hope of another referendum, forget it. The people's decision, David Cameron told MPs today, must be respected. The Prime Minister said leaving the EU would mean a series of complex decisions. But he's likely to be out by the end of August himself, leaving all that to his successor. One man who clearly wants the job, Boris Johnson, has insisted it would be possible to have both access to the single market and end the free movement of people at the same time. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, has this report.
He's known for the swagger of his Commons appearances, but today David Cameron came not just humbled, but humiliated.
I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to...
Before he spoke, a newly elected Labour by-election victor had to be sworn in. Her first day, tipped into politics in both main parties in turmoil.
So let me welcome the new member for Tooting to her place. Yeah. I think I'd advise her to keep her mobile phone on. She might be in the shadow cabinet by the end of the day. And I thought I was having a bad day.
David Cameron said he was setting up a unit of top civil servants to start looking at what his delivery suggested was a lengthy list of negotiations he'd gladly leave to someone else.
I think what will happen is that this new unit's got to get up and running, and it's got to go through all of the complex issues that need to be sorted out, whether about agriculture payments or borders or the situation in Northern Ireland, complex issues about which British laws need to be rewritten because they mention a lot of EU law and all the rest of it.
On the big question of Britain's overall relationship with Europe, David Cameron hinted pretty strongly that if we're to be out, he'd prefer as close a relationship as possible, staying in the single market.
One of the most important tasks for the new government will be to negotiate the best possible arrangements with the single market, and that'll be debated endlessly in this House. And there's obviously a very strong case for trying to remain in that single market in some form, but that's going to be a decision for the new government and for the Parliament.
David Cameron repeatedly acknowledged his powers had largely evaporated, minding the shop until his successor turns up. And today the Conservative 1922 Backbench Committee agreed a speeded up timetable for that. Candidates must put in nominations by midday Thursday. MPs will then vote a week tomorrow and again at intervals until they whittle the number of candidates down to 2. If it's a short list to start with, we could have a new Prime Minister in August. Even if there's a long list of candidates, it looks like we'll be getting a new Prime Minister by the beginning of September at the very latest, a month earlier than David Cameron suggested on Friday. In the Commons, the Labour leader, distracted by a mass walkout from his shadow cabinet, slapped down his own MPs.
Our country is divided, and the country will thank neither the benches in front of me nor those behind for indulging in internal factioning manoeuvring at this time. We have...
One Labour MP shouted resign. Over his shoulder, SNP MPs mocked Labour's plight. Their parliamentary leader threatened another independence vote.
We have no intention whatsoever of seeing Scotland taken out of Europe. That would be totally democratically unacceptable. We are a European country and we will stay a European country. And if that means we have to have an independence referendum to protect Scotland's place, then so be it.
Boris Johnson wasn't in the Commons for the statement, but in his column in The Telegraph, he outlined what one supporter said was his bargaining position on Britain's relationship with the EU. He wrote, "There will continue to be access to the single market," and went on, "British people will still be able to go and work in the EU. But there would be a points-based system which would apply to EU citizens wanting to come to the UK. One of his own supporters called that ridiculous. He'll have to do better. It's a have your cake and eat it approach.
Should Britain stay in the single market? Can we do that with a points-based immigration system?
You definitely have access.
But with a points-based immigration system?
You betcha.
Back in the Commons, opponents of Brexit vented their feelings about the campaign.
The leaders of the Brexit campaign have engendered an atmosphere where some people believe it is open season now for racism and xenophobia.
The first cabinet post the referendum was a sombre affair. There was agreement they should try to dampen some people's hopes of a second referendum. But they had little to say on what should fill the gigantic gap left in policy direction by the first one.
Gary Gibbon. Well, now, this should have been the highlight of Nigel Farage's career, a political life devoted to this very moment. But there's not much euphoria. Indeed, Mr. Farage has told us he now fears he's being betrayed by some of the backtracking by key figures on the Leave side on issues like freedom of movement and immigration controls. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Jonathan Rugman has been exclusively talking to Mr. Farage on a walk through the battlefields of the Somme in northern France, 100 years after Europe was consumed by the bloody slaughter of war.
For over 3 decades, Nigel Farage has been visiting the Somme battlefield several times every year. This morning it was over the top again, into the vast crater left by British mines, which blew up on the German front line when the battle began 100 years ago this Friday.
So about 400 Germans were killed immediately when this went up. And yesterday
there has always been a whiff of cordite about Farage, the smell of danger. And today, the man who lit the touch paper to set off the biggest political explosion of modern times showed no hint of remorse.
But you have put a massive great bomb beneath the British economy, possibly even British society, haven't you?
There's no bomb beneath the economy. Let's get real. Nowhere else in the world do we pretend that we have to have political union in order to buy and sell goods and services from each other. It's complete and utter rubbish. It's an outdated model. It's not fit for the 21st century. So on the economics of it, I believe we can do far better. As far as society is concerned, well, perhaps there's been a bomb put under the Conservative and Labour parties, but quite right too. You know, they have both agreed we should be part of this. The British people have said we shouldn't be part of this. That's why you're now seeing political collateral damage.
With over 19,000 British dead on July the 1st, 1916, this was Britain's most awful moment at war. Idealism perished here, as the historian A.J.P. Taylor put it. Last Friday's result certainly wasn't that. Even if to some, Farage is a loose cannon, a political general who has doomed today's youth.
Your wife is German, your children are half German. Do they not say to you, you've taken away our right to live and work wherever we want in this continent? I mean, that's what people are saying in the UK, that they've been something has been taken away from them at the moment when you say the country has been taken back.
Well, the country has been taken back. We can now make our own laws, have our own courts, control our own borders, and, crucially, choose our own friends globally to do special deals and trade deals with. I suspect quite a lot of young people right at the moment do think something's been taken from them. That's what they've been encouraged to believe. I think in time they'll think we've gained something.
That's a gamble on a day when sterling plunged to its lowest level since Farage first came here in the 1980s. At the memorial to the Ulster Division, which won 4 Victoria Crosses on the Somme first day.
Hello. Good, nice to meet you.
These Welsh workmen, preparing for thousands of visitors, tried to make light of the current turmoil.
You voted to stay?
You did, yeah.
I don't like change.
You don't like change?
No.
What if it's for the better?
We had a bit of an interesting one, whereas my wife wanted to stay and I wanted to leave, so we counteracted each other and didn't bother voting.
But Mr Farage says there will be no catastrophic job losses and no break-up of the UK either.
But is losing Scotland a price worth paying for Brexit?
Well, I don't think we will, and here's why. Is Nicola Sturgeon really going to hold a referendum against independence? Because that's what she'd be doing. And once that gets explained to the Scottish people, once they realise the ramifications of being in the EU, I think they'll vote differently. Even if there was another referendum in Scotland, I think they'd lose by a bigger margin than they lost last time.
Dan Hannan, fellow MEP, Conservative with the Leave campaign, is saying he doesn't want to cut immigration sharply. Is it actually going to happen, or have the people who voted Leave been sold a pup and been told that they can control immigration when in fact they can't?
Well, we can control immigration. All we need is a Conservative Party government with the will to do it. And to hear someone like Dan Hannan effectively selling out, or potentially selling out already, worries me greatly. We've voted to take back control of our country and its borders.
There have been signs saying refugees not welcome. There have been anti-Muslim remarks made. Are you going to condemn those? Because it's as if you have unleashed a deeply unpleasant strain of British society that sees the referendum result as the reason to come out and be proud of their views.
Well, the real prejudice has been the prejudice that's been there for a decade or more against anybody that dares stand up against the establishment, anybody that dares to say we shouldn't be part of the European Union, and anybody that thinks we should even question immigration as an issue.
But you do accept that there's something nasty in the woodshed that is coming out because of what happened last week. Racist remarks, Poles being berated, Muslims being verbally criticised.
I think there's nastiness on both sides, and I think what we've got is an atmosphere post the referendum of very, very heightened feelings.
And you don't bear any responsibility for that?
And some bad things being said on both sides.
But you don't bear any responsibility for that?
Well, I've never, ever, ever encouraged or condoned behaviour like that, and I never, ever would.
In the sombre quiet of these once raging battlefields, the UKIP leader is no longer singing like the escaped canary he was on Friday morning.
Because it was chalk, it was very, very easy just to get all the leaves and old trees out and everything.
It's not just because he's acknowledging the heroism of those who fought in these Somme trenches, once over 16 miles long. Or the 7,000 British soldiers buried here, where the boys from Sheffield fell. Nigel's worried he hasn't got his country back. He hasn't spoken to Boris Johnson or Michael Gove since the referendum, and he fears the next Prime Minister will fail to serve up a full British Brexit.
I don't care who the next Conservative leader is, as long as it's somebody who will hold faith with that referendum result. And I think over the next week or two, we will see the names coming forward and we will see precisely...
But is Boris Johnson your favourite candidate to be the next Prime Minister?
Well, I think that Boris has a lot going for him in terms of public appeal, but perhaps some of the things he's been saying over the last 48 hours indicate there might be a slight softening of his position.
What's he been saying that worries you?
Just that there's no rush, which can be fine, but does he really want to deal with this free movement issue? I don't yet know the answer to that. I'm worried that's being used as a smokescreen to do a different kind of deal with the European Union that would keep us within free movement, and I'm pretty cautious about some of the motives of those who are saying we should take our time.
It sounds as if you smell betrayal in the air, and that maybe over the 17 million people who vote leave won't get what you had in mind.
I'm nervous. I'm nervous. I'm more nervous than I was on Friday morning. I'm beginning to hear noises. I'm beginning to detect there may be some backsliding, and I do not find that acceptable.
But it must be tempting for you to wrap up UKIP, rejoin the Conservative Party of your Thatcherite youth, and become Lord Farage of Biggin Hill, or whatever the title is.
If I was to rejoin the Conservative Party, and then they did not carry out the wishes of 17.5 million people, I would have failed everybody.
His respects paid here on this 100th anniversary. Nigel Farage is tonight back in Brussels, where he has worked as an MEP for 17 years. His job there apparently far safer than he would like. Jonathan Rugman, Channel 4 News, the Somme.
And we're joined again by Gary Gibbon. Gary, the whole demeanour of Mr Farage is that of criticising Mr Johnson in particular for backsliding, quote.
Well, there's been a sense, even during the referendum campaign, you could hear it from people on the Remain side, some people even on the Leave side, that expectations were being built up amongst the voters who were going towards Leave, that some amazing sort of pulling up of the drawbridge will be happening on immigration, which an awful lot of the establishment politicians who will finally decide what's going to happen aren't actually inclined to. And you could hear that again and again, and it looks as though, even sooner than some people expected, we are bumping into a certain bit of reality here. Boris Johnson's article didn't suggest that he, if he were to become leader, was quite ready to go down that route, and David Cameron, in the Commons, as we heard earlier, is trying to lean people a bit towards a closer sort of relationship, maybe being in the single market. So the narrative of betrayal, which could be incredibly potent if these feelings have been stirred up amongst parts of the population, has come upon us incredibly quickly.
And it sounded from today's Commons answers from the Prime Minister as if he may be gone sooner than he thought.
Well, the backbench committee of MPs that decides these things, it will go to one other committee of activists next, but it looks as though we've seen the outline of a timetable now, and it's quicker than David Cameron expected. I'm told it came to him as a bit of a surprise that they decided to speed it up. He could be gone by the middle of August, potentially, if there aren't that many candidates. I'm told he's a bit taken aback by that, but the reason why it happened in the room, one of the two reasons it happened in the room, was the sense of a political vacuum, everything we've been talking about, the need to sort of move on to the solutions to this great big void that's been opened up, but also MPs in the room very aware of the economic indicators, to which now has been added the ratings drop.
Briefly, grisly meeting in Brussels tomorrow. He goes in and says, I'm a loser.
Well, I don't think he'll necessarily go in and say that, but one EU diplomat said they expect him to go in and lecture them, and they rather expect to use him as a punchbag. But I suspect what he will do is try and set the tone for the negotiations that follow his premiership. And he'll want to keep the tone as calm, considered as possible, not acrimonious, because he and George Osborne and Philip Hammond seem to be interested in trying to get a closer relationship than was necessary on a lot of people's minds when they voted Leave.
Our political editor, Gary Gibbon. Well, apart from snatched sightings, the leaders of the Vote Leave campaign, Boris Johnson and Michael Gove, have hardly been seen or heard from since the result, apart from the former mayor's newspaper column this morning. However, joining me now is Chris Grayling, a member of the Cabinet who campaigned for Leave. Chris Grayling, you heard probably Nigel Farage say that he thinks there's backsliding, there's slippage, and it's all about freedom of movement and most particularly the single market.
Well, I think he's putting two and two together and getting six, to be frank. I mean, the reality is we're 3 days after the referendum. We are starting the process of putting together the ingredients we will need to go through a successful negotiation of our future relationship with the European Union. There are a number of clear messages that came from the referendum campaign. People expect us to be an open, outward-looking country, looking to forge new trade deals around the world, looking at new opportunities. Well, what they want is a fair trading arrangement.
Do you want us in the single market?
I want us to have a tariff-free, business-as-usual relationship with the European Union. The details of that are going to come through the negotiation.
But could I ask you a third time, do you want to be in the single market?
Well, what do you mean by being in the single market?
Well, we're in it at the moment.
Well, I want our businesses to be able to carry on selling their products in Europe, delivering their services in Europe, and I want European businesses that sell far more to us than we do to them to be able to carry on doing the same. Now, that, to my mind, is continuing to trade. Now, you can call it what you like, but that's what we want.
You know enough to know that the price for that is freedom of movement of labour.
I don't accept that. We are unique. We're the 5th biggest economy. We're their biggest customer. And we will negotiate, I think, a successful package with the European Union because it's in their financial and commercial interest to do so. There are millions of European jobs that depend on the United Kingdom. We are 16% of their exports. We are in a very different position to everyone else. We need to negotiate a sensible arrangement with them.
But it also sounds as if the Leave campaigners that are now contesting for a prime ministerial position are talking in terms of not being able quite to have the control over immigration that you campaigned for.
Well, as we stand today, we are all government ministers in the same government. Boris Johnson is now back on our backbenches. He may stand for the leadership this week, others may stand as well, and they will set out their stall. But right now,
you can't talk about immigration now because you're leader of the House?
Well, I can talk about immigration and say I think the clear message that we got from the referendum last week is that we need to take back control of our immigration system and we need to set limits on the number of people who come and live and work here. I'm very clear about that.
Can I suggest to you, as a member of the government now, not as a Leave campaigner, that it is the height of irresponsibility to have taken Britain into a referendum with no plan as to what would happen if we fell out and we lost?
Well, I think it's a very straightforward plan. We now need to go through a process which will eventually involve triggering Article 50, where we negotiate what should be, in my view, a business-as-usual trading relationship with the European Union. And the reason for that, we buy far more from them than they buy from us.
But you didn't predict that the Germans and the others would say, out now, get on with it, come on, we don't want you in here if you don't want it. There is no willingness to be as elastic as you said we could be. There isn't.
Well, you say that. There's a lot of heat and air from Brussels, but there's a lot of pragmatism coming from other European capitals, from Finland, from Germany. We had the German CBI saying that we need to carry on with business as usual. We've had the German government saying they want to take time to get it right. This is common sense, and common sense is there in abundance in other member states who want a close relationship with us in the future. We want to be good friends and neighbours. We just don't want to be part of what is becoming a European superstate.
Did you level with voters in what would happen at the moment at which we voted to leave? Because today we have Barclays down 20%, we have RBS down 21%, we have Foxtons down 23%. People are losing, and the survey today by the Institute of Directors states that 25% of the businesses they surveyed are freezing every job, and 5% are already sacking people.
Well, and what we've had today is also the former governor of the Bank of England saying people shouldn't be panicked, we will get through this fine. We've also got the current governor of the Bank of England who has put in place a plan to support the market.
Jobs are going, I've told you. Jobs are being frozen. Banks are losing shares. What's going on? This is not what you predicted, and it's nothing to do with the Bank of England. It's everything to do with what you've done.
We've got what precisely the Bank of England prepared for, which is a period of instability in the markets.
Your conscience is
clear.
Your conscience is clear. People are losing their jobs tonight, Mr. Graham.
Interestingly,
are you happy about that?
Interestingly, the price, and I'm never happy of anybody losing their job, but interestingly, the price of our government bonds has gone up. The yields on them has come down. The problems are elsewhere in the European markets. Last Friday, for example, European stock markets fell by far more than ours. Bond markets became problematic in Southern Europe.
Do you think that language is being understood in South Shields, in Middlesbrough, in Hartlepool, in places where people are struggling, where austerity and all the rest has bitten hard into their lives?
So what that means is that it is in our mutual interest of the rest of the European Union and ourselves to reach a sensible trading arrangement. What people voted for was to take back control of the country. That's what's going to happen.
On that note, we have to end, but thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you. Well, if the Conservatives think they've got problems, Labour is imploding so fast there's barely a member of the original shadow cabinet left. Jeremy Corbyn was met with jeers in the Commons as he accused his detractors of indulging in internal manoeuvring. Tonight, he'll be speaking at a rally on the left-wing Momentum Group down the road in Whitehall as dozens of his own backbenchers join the growing clamour for him to go. Our political correspondent Michael Crick has this report.
Morning, Mr. Corbyn. Why are you continuing to hold on, Mr.
Good morning,
Corbyn?
everybody. Nice
Will
to
you
see
resign
you.
later
Nice
today
to see
if more
all.
people leave?
Very nice to see you all.
Thank you so much for coming along today.
Did you discuss your statement last night with Tom Watson, Mr. Corbyn?
Jeremy Corbyn's fighting to remain Labour leader rather more tenaciously than he fought to remain in Europe. And Corbyn's friends remain adamant he won't quit.
No, not at all. No, he's the elected leader of the Labour Party by the party members. They're the sovereign body. So no, Jeremy shouldn't resign at all.
At 9 a.m. at Westminster, Corbyn held a 20-minute meeting with his deputy, Tom Watson. I'm told the two men spent the first 5 minutes discussing Glastonbury, but then Tom Watson told Jeremy Corbyn he'd lost a lot of his authority among Labour MPs and that it was now inevitable there'll be a leadership challenge. Watson didn't tell Corbyn he should resign, but he did ask the Labour leader whether he really wanted to go through what was bound to be a bruising contest. An hour later, 5 shadow cabinet members turned up, including Owen Smith and Lisa Nandy, people with broadly leftish leanings. According to one source, the delegation arrived in conciliatory mood, hoping to advise Corbyn on how to heal the left-right divide. But then apparently, John McDonnell turned up unexpectedly, and whenever they asked Corbyn a question, he leapt in to answer it, and they found his answers so hostile that they all left the meeting feeling they had no option but to resign. You found John McDonnell particularly aggressive, is that right?
I refused to join the Russia resignations yesterday. I wanted to be able to continue to serve the Labour Party in his shadow cabinet. That became impossible today, and quite clearly impossible. And having promised to be a broad and inclusive leader when he started, he's now lost MPs across the political breadth of the Labour Party, including people like me who wanted to make Labour work under his leadership.
After 12 names left the shadow cabinet yesterday, this morning, Jeremy Corbyn announced replacements, with Emily Thornberry shadowing Foreign Affairs and several new names, such as Clive Lewis at Defence, only elected MPs last year. But today saw 11 resignations in all. 3/4 of the shadow cabinet have now gone. Perhaps the biggest loss today was Angela Eagle, often a good stand-in for Corbyn at question time. She seemed tearful. Angela Eagle, why have you resigned?
Well, I've made that clear.
Can you tell us why you've resigned?
I've made it clear that I don't think it's working.
It's not working?
And Jeremy needs to think about his position.
And he refused to see you?
Well, he didn't call me back for 24 hours, so I had to phone him and talk to him.
In the background, a heckler.
These people got no right to represent Labour in Parliament. They can't stand up
You're
for
happy
Corbyn.
with Jeremy Corbyn's leadership?
He's the right man for Labour. They want to support the Tories, they can go and join the Tories.
In the Commons, Tories mocked Corbyn when he said this.
Many people feel disenfranchised and powerless.
Unfortunate wording there, but earlier left-winger Dennis Skinner hugged the Labour leader in solidarity, then sat down and seemed to flick a V sign towards the rebels. Watch the extraordinary moment again. Andy MacDonald, Corbyn's new shadow transport secretary, is equally upset.
Some of them made their minds up the moment he was elected that they weren't going to give him their support. So it comes as no surprise whatsoever. But I think this is the wrong response, the wrong reaction. We should be holding a government to account.
Some left-wingers warned MPs today they might be sacked by their local parties. And the Momentum Group organised a protest outside Parliament tonight.
What's going to make it difficult for us to win election is not Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, which is doing quite fine, thank you very much. If you look at how we're doing the polls, you look at the electoral tests he's faced so far, he's doing okay. And then, but what they're going to see is a party divided, the shadow cabinet members flouncing out, and that's really what I think could hurt us in a snap election. It's really irresponsible to the country, it's really irresponsible for the party.
But the Momentum people say he's got a mandate. Hundreds of thousands of them voted for him.
Well, David Cameron has a mandate, and when the writing was on the wall, he rightly stood down after what he has done to our country. And I think, people resign when the time is right. It's not about a cult of personality. Our party is not about one man, it is about all of the people in the country, and one man's mandate is nothing compared to what all those people out there need.
Well, our Labour MPs have been meeting somewhere up in this building behind me on a vote of confidence in Jeremy Corbyn. Michael, what is actually going on?
Well, you've got the MPs meeting in the Palace of Westminster, hundreds of them packed into a committee room, so packed that some of Jeremy Corbyn's own staff have difficulty getting in there and only managed to squeeze in right at the back, while there are hundreds of pro-Corbyn people out in Parliament Square chanting and speaking and so on. So only a couple of 100 yards apart. But this meeting tonight, I'm told by one source, was brutal. A whole succession of Labour MPs came out and criticised Jeremy Corbyn. Only one MP spoke in his favour by the time I'd left, which was, I'm told, Barry Gardiner, who was appointed to the Shadow Cabinet today. And there were powerful speeches from people like Alan Johnson, who, according to one MP I was speaking to, was angry, and this MP said he'd never seen Alan Johnson angry before, but Johnson, was saying apparently that Jeremy Corbyn's office had undermined the Labour In campaign, had never sent people along to the weekly meetings, and had toned down the messages of the campaign. Another strong speaker, Chris Bryant, who resigned from the Shadow Cabinet last night, said that the job of a Labour leader was to unite the party. Well, he said Jeremy Corbyn couldn't unite a room. It was to have vision. Well, he had no vision, and to be a Prime Minister in waiting, and he certainly wasn't that. Ian Murray, the former Scottish spokesman, the only Scottish MP, called on Jeremy Corbyn to call off the protesters, apparently, that have been protesting outside his Edinburgh office.
Well, talking of protesters, let's just go over there and have a look at them. Here's a very large number of people out of here, several thousand probably. They are Corbynistas and determined that he should stay, and in a way they are part of that 400,000 that elected Jeremy Corbyn. So what happens now?
Well, indeed, although not all of them are members of the Labour Party or able to vote in the Labour. I see the Socialist Workers Party,
there are
for instance,
a few trots out
had
there.
their stall out there, as they usually do on such occasions. This is the extraordinary division between the Parliamentary Labour Party, where Jeremy Corbyn probably hasn't got more than 2 or 3 dozen supporters, and the Labour Party outside, where his people claim they've still got the membership.
Right.
Others dispute that.
Michael Crick, thank you very much indeed. Joining us now, Diane Abbott, one of the Shadow Cabinet members who has stood by Jeremy Corbyn since the referendum result, taking on the Shadow Health Secretary brief, and Owen Smith, who earlier today resigned as Shadow Work and Pension Secretary in protest. Owen Smith, I gather that when you actually had your discussion with Mr Corbyn, you said, are you prepared to split the Labour Party over this? What was his answer?
Well, I didn't get an answer that I was happy with, and I felt that Jeremy didn't appreciate the grave risk that happens, and that is why ultimately I felt I had to do something that I did with an incredibly heavy heart and resign. John, I just want to say, I admire Jeremy Corbyn in many, many ways. I served in his Shadow Cabinet, not just out of loyalty to the Labour Party, because I believe he is right about many of the economic observations he's made. He is right that we need an anti-austerity Labour government. He's right that we need investment in schools and infrastructure and on industrial areas. He's right
what's
about
the
all
problem?
of that. Well, the problem is I don't think we can win with Jeremy. And the problem is he has now lost such faith and trust in the Parliamentary Labour Party, and I fear amongst Labour voters that we risk both splitting the Labour Party, which would be absolutely criminal, and not winning election. And I can't stand by in the Shadow Cabinet, much as I wanted to, and went into that meeting today hoping to still work alongside Diane. I can't stand by and let that happen.
Diane Abbott, nearly everybody who's resigned has said the same thing, that in fact he's a sweet and lovely guy and he has good beliefs, but he's no good at running the party.
If they really thought he was so sweet, they wouldn't be making the bogus allegation that he is responsible for Brexit winning. Jeremy covered thousands of miles up and down the country trying to get Labour voters out.
Owen Smith says it's got nothing to do with it.
It's Cameron's fault that we've got. It's absolutely not Jeremy's fault, Diane. You know, I think.
That's what I'm saying.
Cameron's fault.
But what I'm saying is that we got 60% of Labour voters out. If Cameron had got a similar proportion of Tory voters out, Brexit would have lost.
But we have a devastating dichotomy here between somebody who's in touch to some extent with the alienated people who voted because they have suffered austerity and all the rest of it. They voted against Europe because they wanted to vote against anything that any of you politicians wanted to say to them. And that's what they've done. So how do you connect with them? Because basically, this place is completely out of touch with your value too.
Well, I think that's right, and I personally feel we shouldn't have been making an argument in favour of free movement. I think free movement is something that we can make a progressive case against. It is a free market in people, with people being traded as low-wage commodities. And I think that was a mistake we made in this election.
Owen and I
However,
disagree on this. There are people in the Parliament, a lot of them, who think that it's all about immigration. And the answer is to move right on immigration and make promises on ending free movement, which actually we can't fulfil. Because even after Brexit, if you want to be part of a single market, you've got to have a measure of free movement.
But if that is the case, why wouldn't Jeremy Corbyn, however, once the chips were down and this thing had to be won, why wouldn't he stand with David Cameron and say, look, there's one thing that unites us, it's the single market and freedom of... They both agreed on that.
We saw what happened in Scotland when we did that. We destroyed our vote. Jeremy could not have worked harder. It isn't his fault we lost the Brexit vote. And this coup, because it is a coup...
But you accept he refused. He wouldn't stand with the Prime Minister.
We saw what happened in Scotland. Why should he do that? But my point is this.
It's a red herring, John. I think Dan is right. It's a red herring. Jeremy Corbyn is not to blame for Brexit.
So
but we do need a Labour government right now, because the country is facing the gravest crisis in my life and your life. And you need a strong Labour government.
What is specifically wrong with Jeremy Corbyn?
He cannot win us the next election.
And that is true, is it not?
This coup has been planned for months. And the people that are noisiest about Jeremy Corbyn, I won't own him in this, but
I'm not one of them. You know that.
They've never supported him. I mean, what the Brexit vote showed you is that people...
No, a lot of the resignees today have fervently supported him and have expressed their utter frustration in trying to work with him. So one of them said that she took 3 days to try and get a text message reply. I mean, she phoned and phoned. It was impossible to deal with him.
I can only tell you that Jeremy did his very best to reach out to these people. But my point is this. The Brexit voters, particularly Brexit voters in Wales and the Labour heartlands, they're fed up with politics as usual. And some of my colleagues seem to want to replace Jeremy with somebody who will be politics as usual. How does that make sense? If our voters are sceptical about Europe, why do you remove a leader who shares their scepticism? Is it that they want to win, or is it that they're determined to remove
But there's
Jeremy?
some confusion here. Is there a preparedness to campaign for freedom of movement and access to the single market?
I think, again, that is a slight red herring today. I think the truth is we've got
Well, it's going to be something which has to be done.
In my view, as no longer a member of the Shadow Cabinet, we should be making a progressive case against free movement of people, which is affecting badly people in many areas of the state. However, I just want to be clear, John.
The Labour Party should come out against freedom of movement and against the single market.
I think we should certainly come out. No, I think we should be in the single market, but we should be arguing for British exemption. I just want to make clear that, John, because Dan is right. This has been orchestrated, and it has, I think, been deplorable in many respects. And I do not give any credit to those people.
I'm going to have to pause you there, but thank you both very much for coming in. Thank you. And later in the programme, I'll be in the studio with people from across the generations. No, that's Kathy who's going to be in the studio with the generations. So I'm going to cross to her because that's precisely where she is.
Yes, indeed, John. I will be in the studio with people from across the generational and political divide. What are they hoping for post-Brexit? What kind of country do they want us to become? We're also up in Hartlepool to find out why voters there felt so shut out of the political system and who they really blame. And the ugly face of Britain, the football hooligans whose racism is a stain on the nation's pride.
Thank you, Kathy. Well, from here in Berlin, a reminder of our main headlines on this especially extended news. We're on air until 8:30 tonight, with Britain adrift in this uncertain post-Brexit world. David Cameron has told MPs the result of the referendum is clear and the will of the people must be respected. The man vying to replace him, Boris Johnson, has insisted there is still confidence in Britain's economy, claiming the pound and the markets had stabilised. But even UKIP leader Nigel Farage is short on cheer, telling us he feels betrayed by some of the Leave backsliding on key pledges like immigration and free movement. Well, Germany is at the very heart of the European project, a country which has more at stake and more to lose if the fabric of the entire European Union begins to fall apart. The German Chancellor Angela Merkel is meeting French and Italian leaders here in Berlin right now. They've been saying there's no time to waste organising Britain's exit from the EU. But today's meeting wasn't just about the divorce from Britain, also how to reboot the existing marriages of the European Union. The Germans have made a career out of never forgetting the past, lest the past should be tempted to repeat itself. It's all a bit earnest, like the buildings. The dome of the Reichstag, for instance, designed by a Brit, made out of glass to allow the light of transparency to shine on the entrails of democracy. And since the EU has by and large been good to Germany, when a big if irksome member of the club says they want out, the response is sorrow mingled with a fear of contagion. Have you ever been this upset about something political?
Yeah, I think now I'm in the age to think clearly about politics. So for me, for my age, for my knowledge now, it's the worst what happened.
Brexit is the worst?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you think that the whole of Europe is at stake here?
I don't know what will happen, but you can't say if the other countries are leaving or not. So I think it's not a good step for the EU, for the whole EU.
Some politicians in this country have said, out is out, what's done is done, you've got to leave quickly. What do you think?
I don't think so, no. I don't think so. I think the whole project of EU is about to shatter if we're acting too quick right now.
The whole project of the EU
I would say
could shatter?
I think so, yes. I think like acting like too soon or like not giving it time could be making the problem worse than it is actually.
Wenn also Großbritannien erstmal die Europäische Union verlässt, ich denke, dann werden noch andere Länder folgen, denke ich.
Okay. So what he just said is if he is worried about the future of Europe, if Britain leaves, if a country like Britain can leave Europe, then who knows who'll be next. Danke. Wiedersehen. It may look like Starship Enterprise on cruise control, but this is the Frankfurt Stock Exchange today. And behind the inscrutable faces, the fear of market contagion continues to pulsate. Friday's losses were extended, and there's no end in sight to the uncertainty.
Europe is so weak, so you cannot let a big country like the UK infect other countries with this virus of disintegration.
And one more thing, although he may not like what he's hearing, there are winners and losers in this game, and I'm not talking about the football. Frankfurt is already touting for banks getting ready to flee the UK. In Berlin, cheaper, cleaner and smaller than London, startups will be welcomed with open arms. Florian Noll is glued to his mobile these days, drumming up new business.
Berlin is already a place to be for entrepreneurs and well-qualified staff in the digital economy from all over the world. And yeah, we have to take this chance. We will invite our founder friends as well as venture capital investors from London to move to Berlin. But it's not the time to celebrate this victory.
Don't mention victory. The chariot atop the Brandenburg Gate has watched Prussian, Napoleonic, Nazi and Soviet armies march underneath it. The peace, prosperity and unity of the last quarter of a century are a mere blip in German history. No wonder the US Secretary of State, on a detour to Brexit-bruised Brussels, went for the big picture.
I think it's important to note that ever since World War II, we have been working, all of us together, on the development of a structure to be able to make our country stronger. The interests and the values which have united us for such a long period of time did not change on the day of that vote.
Even before last week, there was a feeling that all over Europe, Generation Selfie was upset, unseen and unheard by the elite, whoever they are, and by their politicians. Brexit has just turned a faint feeling into a screaming urgency. Well, the message from the three European leaders meeting in the city was threefold. First, a celebration of the fundamental values of the European Union, lest anyone should forget. Secondly, a recognition that much more needs to be done to meet the wishes of Europe's citizens, especially when it comes to jobs and growth. And thirdly, an acknowledgement that the urgency of this debate was created by Brexit. So the memo to London boils down to, thanks for triggering this conversation. And yes, we did need to have it. Now, good luck to you. Well, joining me here are Philip Rotman, he's the Associate Director of the Global Public Policy Institute, and the freelance British journalist who's also based in Berlin, Josie LeBlanc. Thanks to both of you for coming. Philip, let's start with this speed of divorce. What are the divisions here? Because Angela Merkel seems to be saying, let's calm down a little bit, and then others like her foreign minister and the French president are saying, get out the door.
I think both are reasonable positions. The foreign minister here, I think, primarily wants to avoid the impression that it's easy to get out and that there's no price to pay. Where Angela Merkel doesn't want to look like a prick and wants to look reasonable and play the long game.
Okay, we don't use that language on television in Britain. Anyway, the serious question here is this: when they talk about rebooting Europe, of starting the project all over again, what are they actually talking about? Do they have any idea of what this vision looks like?
No, I don't think so. I think they were blindsided just like anyone else by the Brexit vote, and now they need time to think about it. But they clearly have understood they need to listen to the people, and they need to do something against these populists, and need to redevelop buy-in to Europe.
Josie, looking at Berlin with people sunning themselves in the parks on their bicycles, I mean, it's a wonderful day. One gets a sense that there's a bit of complacency amongst the people of Berlin about what's happening. Is that fair?
I think that's been the case for several months now. If any of my German colleagues and friends have asked me about Brexit, there's definitely a feeling that it was never going to happen. So I think, as you said, everyone has really been caught short by this result.
But do they also feel that the whole project needs to be rebooted? Do they feel that, or is that just something that the politicians are telling them?
Well, I think it's interesting what's happened today. Angela Merkel might have to be worried about her elections coming up next year and thinking about austerity and how popular that is with the German electorate. Her Vice-Chancellor, the Social Democrat, is very much pro-stimulus to Europe in order to make it more popular, but Angela Merkel and probably the German electorate would be very much against that.
How much anger is there here amongst politicians and people that Britain has really complicated matters enormously?
I think there's some anger, but I think ultimately people are too much focused on their own domestic lives. I mean, like you said, you know, most people don't really bother too much with this situation, and I think even the anger that is there will blow over within a couple of months.
Okay, got to leave it there. Philip Hoffmann, Josie Bond, thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme. Now, you'd be forgiven for forgetting that there's still a European football tournament going on, and England fans have been gathering in Nice ahead of tonight's clash with Iceland. Our sports correspondent Kami Nzerim is there, and there's no hiding from the Brexit debate ahead of tonight's England game. Kami, what have the fans been saying about Britain's future?
Well, Matt, it very much depends on who you ask, because down here in the south of France, there are, of course, France fans. Because of tonight's game, there are also Iceland fans and there are also England fans. Now, one thing is for sure, sport and politics do mix. The fans that we spoke to, at least, do have opinions about Brexit, about immigration, about finance and much, much more. And those opinions, well, they were far from shy about sharing them with us.
Okay. Thanks, Kami. Well, back to Europe's other challenge now, and the Euros have been marred by sporadic violence, from England and Russia fans in Marseille to Lille and Lyon. This programme went undercover with some of the England fans before last week's referendum and found some shocking racist and abusive behaviour. And a warning, there is strong language of a racial and highly offensive nature in Paul McNamara's report.
The eyes of Europe are on France. An entire continent is coming together. And these are our unwitting ambassadors.
I'm just here for the violence. I'm just here for the pushes. If you
It's the start of a major football tournament at the end of a major political campaign. And Channel 4 News has gone undercover with England fans. This is mid-afternoon, 22 miles from where a game is being played, and unprovoked. And perhaps most shocking of all, our team joined England fans the day after beating Wales 2-1, drinking en masse in Place de la Gare, the central square in Lille. Roma children wander the streets here. Some fans give them coins, some bump fists, and some are vile. This wasn't the only hate we witnessed aimed at Roma children. We also witnessed fans stepping up to defend. The night before, English and Russian fans clashed here. 37 went to police cells, 16 went to hospital. But today, among some England fans, the hostility still flows as freely as the beer. And just 6 days before the most important democratic decision of many a generation, this was the message from one small section of society. And then came the misogyny. Two nights later, and the flock of fans have migrated to Lyon. England play Slovakia the next day. There are skirmishes throughout the city as local hardline hooligans, known as ultras, clash with our fans. This amateur video purports to show a swarm of England supporters setting upon a French fan. Fresh from the fighting that night, we meet Alex. Happy to take on 40 fighters, unhappy that some England fans fled the violence. Regional pride that those who stood their ground were from his beloved northeast. Thousands of England fans in France are like these, here just to have a good time and enjoy the football. And the FA have been keen to point out that only a tiny minority of fans are involved in any violence. But a tiny minority is all it takes. And what happened to our ambassador on high? In his euphoria ripping up the flags of Europe in front of a baying crowd, he fails to notice his beloved England left blowing in the wind.
Paul McNamara with that piece on England fans and their views before Brexit. Well, what do they think since Brexit? Kamian Zeram has been finding out.
Lilting on the Côte d'Azur breeze among the million-dollar mansions and James Bond Uber yachts, the referendum victory chant as England face Iceland in France. Plenty of time before kick-off for a quick dip, but fluttering above, the French in post-Brexit mourning, or just a cheeky sense of humour.
So, along the rather conveniently named Promenade des Anglais, what is the mood? Vive le Brexit or Regrexit?
Reflecting on the post-Brexit world is easier under a Mediterranean sun. In France, out of Europe, c'est la vie.
You're a Brexiter.
Yep.
And why did you vote leave?
The usual things. It was the immigration issue.
Do you, now that they've said actually we can't guarantee the numbers, do you feel betrayed in any way?
I feel a little bit betrayed, yes, but I like to think I was clever enough to work out that it may not have been the whole truth anyway.
And given what has happened, the lack of a plan, the spook to the market, how do you feel about that?
A spook to the markets, yeah, I mean the markets don't like uncertainty. I mean we will live for that for the next 5 years, no doubt. Will the whole thing collapse? Absolutely it won't.
The beer may suddenly be more expensive, but the party goes on, oiled by the impromptu arrival of a controversial boxing champion.
What do you make of what's been going on at home with politics?
You know what it is, I don't get involved in politics anymore.
Really?
No politics.
Did you vote?
I didn't vote, no.
No, you didn't do it?
I was too busy kicking ass.
Mr. Fury, for one, might avoid politics, but for these fans at least, Brexit is serious business, and Europe has got what it deserved.
If we'd have been taken seriously by Europe when Cameron went to renegotiate, I think Europe didn't take the risk of Brexit very seriously. They should have given us the desire to reform and recreate an EU that we want to be part of.
If Britain could have stayed in to make it work, I think I would have voted in, but it wasn't possible. You've got to leave a sinking ship before it goes down.
For Icelanders living in Britain, however, it's brought an unwelcome undercurrent of xenophobia.
I'm sad that you did what you did.
Really? Why is that?
It sends a bit of a nasty signal to EU immigrants like myself.
While some of the French, flag bearers-in-chief for the entire EU project, appear to have caught the Brexit bug and want their own.
Well, Brexit, yes, Brexit!
Where does it end? The beach, French. The lager, Dutch. The shirt, English. Kami Enzerum, Channel 4 News, Nice.
After the break, when no one is listening to the people, who do the people blame? Incidents of hate are rising and the police are on heightened alert. What happened to our tolerance? And what kind of Britain have we become?
Speak proper English.
Welcome back, and I'm here with an array of people who voted for and against Brexit to find out why and what the result says about the kind of nation we've become. But a worrying insight first, with news that reports of race hate crimes have risen since the referendum. There are mounting allegations of racist and xenophobic graffiti and verbal abuse. So for some people who've lived here all their lives, Britain now feels rather unwelcome, even unsafe. And I should warn you, there is racially offensive language in this report by Porrick O'Brien.
East London on Friday morning. A minicab driver swears at a man in a VW Golf trying to pass. Then that person starts racially abusing the taxi driver.
Speak proper English then.
The question, is this sort of thing more likely to happen after the referendum result? At West London's Polish Cultural Centre, they're answering that question with a resounding yes. On Saturday, and for the first time in nearly 50 years, the building was daubed with a racist slogan.
Thank you. Thank you. There are many of us who are really glad the Poles are here.
Oh, thank you. Oh, that's...
We're honoured that you're here.
Thank you so
While we were there, a man arrived with more flowers and an emotional show of support.
Thank you very
Excuse
much.
me, sir.
Thank
Can you just tell us why you've come?
Well, I've come to support the Poles because I think they've had a really bad time of it, because the Poles are great people and I've always admired them and they integrate well. They're just fantastic people.
As well as the incident at the centre, police are also investigating the fact that these laminated cards were found near a school in Huntingdon, Cambridgeshire. Multiple examples are being posted online, and it's not just anecdotal. 85 race hate incidents were reported to the National Police Hate Crime website between Thursday and Sunday, up from 54 on the same days last month. There's also been reported racial abuse directed at people who voted to leave, of course. The Prime Minister addressed the overall issue today.
We will not stand for hate crime or these kinds of attacks. They must be stamped out.
That's the big picture. Racism, though, an intimate, personal affair. On Sunday, a man slowed down, then accelerated as Nisha Party was at a zebra crossing.
Kind of stepped back and just kind of raised my arms to go, "What are you doing? Did you not see me?" And then he just shouted the P word out of his window. And it was clear to me that that was probably the reason why he didn't want to stop for me. You know, I was definitely called those kind of names when we were growing up, but I haven't been called that for a good 30 years. So it doesn't feel to me like it's a coincidence.
The referendum, it would seem, has given a minority an excuse to voice latent hatred, but also, at the Polish centre, a chance for others, in turn, to voice something else.
Porrick O'Brien reporting there. Now, ask people why they voted to leave Europe, and you'll hear a lot about alienation and fear. Britain's people are adrift, where the fear of immigration, the fear of unemployment and wage cuts, and the fear that no one in power was willing to listen, pushed people to vote for Brexit. However did it come to this? And has the face of Great Britain been replaced by Little England? Our North of England correspondent Kieran Jenkins reports now from Hartlepool.
We're on Murray Street in Hartlepool. It's a town where 7 in 10 voted to leave and where there are clear expectations about what should come next.
We've got to allow so many to come into the country, but I think we should put a hold and stop.
And to think the importance of immigration to the leave vote had been talked down today.
Boris Johnson said today that immigration wasn't the #1 issue. Do you agree with him?
No.
Here, it couldn't be higher on the agenda, and there's little patience for politicians who've modified their message since the vote.
I think it'll go down, but just by sheer public opinion.
Even though some of the politicians seem to be preparing us for not quite that.
I think they'll have to keep their word.
Well, immigration is the issue that keeps coming up. And it's accompanied by concerns about jobs, about wages, about public services. And there's an expectation now in towns like this that feel abandoned, that feel forgotten, that this time they voted for change and that Brexit must deliver, where politics until now has failed.
There's one pledge politicians can't honour, though, because they didn't make it.
What are the promises that have to be kept?
Nobody ever claimed existing EU migrants would no longer be welcome. Nothing of the sort. And yet...
Yeah, they want to cut down on this immigration.
So that's something
and get rid of the half of them that's in the country now. They don't belong here. They're living it here. On the welfare state, that's all they're doing.
But they've got a right to be here at the moment, though, haven't they?
You see more of them walk on the streets and if they haven't got a job. They don't want a job.
Most of them are in work, sir. But everyone who's here already gets to stay. Nobody's going back or going anywhere.
Yeah. It should be the people that's born here gets to stay, but the people that are coming in now shouldn't. They should be deported back out.
You see why people might be upset by that?
Well, I don't know.
Immigration in Hartlepool is actually among the lowest in the northeast. But another telling stat, joblessness, almost twice the national average.
Are you expecting Brexit to deliver jobs for you, for Hartlepool?
Yeah, it's all right. I'm hoping to bring the factories back and the hospital back as well.
But what price change? As a poorer region, the northeast was due €700 million in EU funding. Will Westminster still match it? These two Remain voting students say the debate focused instead on you-know-what.
The immigration that I do see is normally of a benefit in my eyes. If you're in a bad situation, you think it's not going to get worse, so you vote to try and change it because you think, I've got nothing else to lose.
And so it is that on immigration, many here genuinely believe that less is more. Kieran Jenkins, Channel 4 News, Hartlepool.
Well, joining me in the studio now are 8 voters who span that generational, geographical and even occupational divide. 4 who voted Remain and 4 Leave. Darren Grimes, let's start with you. You voted Leave, you're a student. Do you still feel you look pretty happy with that decision?
Oh, I'm absolutely thrilled. I'm so proud of my country. I think we took power and gave it to individuals to make this decision. We decided to go forward as a Britain with global horizons, a Britain which is more internationalist, free trading, and I really look forward to an exciting future now.
Well, that ticked a lot of boxes. Thomas Abelman, you're looking at actually quite grim-faced. You voted Remain. You're just setting up your own business. Tell us, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but do you agree or not?
I am devastated. Above all, I'm angry. I'm angry with a Leave campaign that consistently lied to people. Boris told people that they could have £350 million per week extra on the NHS. He also told people every club, every society, every county, every country that currently benefits from EU funding, like Hartlepool that we heard about earlier, that they could keep all of that as well. And the £350 million, by the way, doesn't exist.
Well, let me bring in...
This cannot happen. It is impossible. Now,
I can see Paulette here. Paulette first. Let me just bring in Paulette first. Hey, let me just introduce you. So you run a small business.
Yes.
You voted for Leave.
Yes.
Pick him up.
I just need to stop this. The 350 million we were talking about, we said we want to spend it on our priorities, and that included the NHS.
So do you deny that Boris promised to spend that £350 million on the NHS?
Funding. Not all of it on the NHS. We want to spend it on our priorities. We kept repeating that on our priorities.
Here is a poster of Boris standing next to a poster, and it says, let's give our NHS the 350 million the EU takes each week.
It's just a word of speech. Like, let's give you the... And now everybody's turning it into this negative. It's not.
That's what he said.
It's
I
not.
am currently
Let's encourage.
raising investment for new business.
Let's be positive for people.
If I presented those numbers...
Thomas, let me just... OK, Sarah, we can't all talk about... Sarah, I want to bring in...
hyperbole, exaggeration and lies on both sides to some extent during the campaign made somebody of my deeply ashamed that this political horlicks has ended up in a national calamity of this kind, and I'm very sorry that a young man like you have been so misguided as to actually think that we haven't just, I was going to use a very rude word, in relation to your future. You will live to see it, and I hope you don't regret that an exercise
I'm absolutely certain
was only about dealing with a flaw in the Tory party has turned out to become a disaster for the country.
Let Darren respond to that point. Hang on one second.
It's a great thing for Andrew.
OK, let Darren respond to that
I'm absolutely certain that a Britain which can determine its own future is very much in our interest as a young person to decide to have a global future and not a narrow-minded one which focuses on one continent of the earth. Britain is a global country.
Sydney's a great-grandmother in Georgia.
And we're all talking at once.
If somebody gives back control, you become strong. I left a domestically violent home, OK? I took back control and became strong. And
Paulette, let me just move on to your neighbour there, Gerard Walsh. You're a hotelier. Was it about immigration or was it about taking back control, as Paulette's just talked about?
Part of it, for me personally, it was about self-governance. But remember, Blackpool had one of the highest, or it was the highest vote Leave in the whole of the North West. People are disconnected with British politics. They are worried about the immigration. It is an issue. We have had 20,000 EU migrants reside in Blackpool since 2006. That does put stresses on public services.
Well,
you can't continue with that.
That's austerity, that's not immigration.
Yes, exactly.
Immigration.
That's a lack of investment, it's not immigration. Immigration opens things up, gives you more opportunities.
Nobody doesn't sympathise with that, but that's exactly the point.
So how much do you keep doing to improve public services? Do you just keep throwing money at it? There has to be a level playing field. There has to be a peak.
£50 million to try it?
What's that, sorry?
How about £350 million?
Well, there you go then. That'd be better spent in the UK.
Take back control of our money and we can distribute it how the British people want to.
Let me bring in Shazia Wan here, because amongst all of these divisions, a lot of racial tensions have emerged. We've been reporting on them tonight. Shazia, you've experienced that personally, haven't you?
I've experienced a lot of this, yes, and I was proudly involved in the Strong Green campaign, and some of my friends did vote for Brexit, but they voted for it intelligently, unlike that young man there, and they voted for it with an educated mind, and I can respect that, although I disagree with them. Now, when I got back from the count on Friday morning, I tweeted something like, it was about 8 a.m, I said, David Cameron is the least worst thing about the Conservative Party. He was a moderniser. I joined the Conservative Party when David Cameron became leader. I thought he was a good leader. I just tweeted that. It was not an inflammatory tweet. Within minutes, I got a tweet back saying, pack your bags and leave, it's time. It was followed with, you are a pig, and if a pig is born in a stable, it doesn't make it a horse. Let me finish. Don't interrupt like your rude Brexit lord. I received this email.
The nasty side.
Yesterday. I'll tell you a nasty side, which is your side. This is somebody that voted leave, and it really upset me because it's gone beyond social media. It's coming to me personally now, and that's why Channel 4 have let me have my phone. It reads this. Shazia, you are not, nor will you ever be Welsh. Being born in Wales has nothing to do with being Welsh. Can't wait to send you, anti-white, scum, garbage hating, back to the third world dump that you came from.
Right,
now, that is not acceptable.
One at a time.
Let me finish rather than telling you.
Sorry, Shazia, just let me Paulette respond to that.
There are people out there that are like that anyway.
Of course.
Okay?
But don't you feel ashamed to be on the same side as them?
We don't condone that.
It's about
there
control.
Are some racists that are on the inside I've met. So, you know,
that is obviously a racist comment, and it should be dealt with in a racist manner.
But don't you feel ashamed to be on the same side as that?
You're on the same side. You're on the same side as these people. Let me finish. You're on the same side as these people.
Controlled immigration. Is Australia racist for having controlled immigration?
The campaign has rubbed acid into what was an ulcer in the country anyway, we know that, and I think anybody taking responsibility either side over much for this ought to get together pretty quick to try and heal the sores that have been opened by totally unnecessary
Of course, you were vice chairman of the Conservative Party and Ted Heath's aide. I mean, how do you feel about your party having done this?
Well, nobody is pretending that the contemporary EU is a perfect successor to what the founding fathers foresaw. But the idea that we should turn our back on a grouping that was about peace and peaceful coexistence in a very troubled world at a time when the whole planet is in turmoil, and the only people who are raising a glass for you people
can I let Darren come back?
Because
he's had a bit of stick tonight, and I need him to respond to it.
I think that where racism is found, it should be tackled. It is wrong. It is not the British way. It is intolerant and disgusting. But I think the sneering, calling me unintelligent, is absolutely why you lost this campaign. Your arrogance and your snobbishness is disgusting, and that is why you lost.
You're agree with the British people because everybody, the racists are minorities. They're a small amount.
We have to finish. I'm really sorry, but we're out of time. We could have done with 3 times the amount of time, but thank you very much, all of you, for coming in. Over to John down in Westminster.
Wow, after the break, shares plummet, the pound slides to some, it's all going to hell in a handbasket. Or is it? We chart our way through the stormy financial waters and ask what this means for the post-Brexit pound in our pocket. Welcome back to Westminster. For this specially extended Channel 4 News, we're here until 8:30 with Britain adrift in this post-Brexit world. Indeed, within the last hour, the country has been stripped of its AAA credit rating by Standard & Poor's. This after a day of plunging shares, the sliding pound, as George Osborne insisted Britain was strong enough to weather the storm. Our business correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi, has this report.
Day 2 in the markets, and the storm clouds were still gathering. The city reflecting on how much further Britain's stocks needed to fall, reflecting too on its own future as it grapples with the new political void. And here's Britain's economic weatherman, but as so often happens, he's changed his forecast.
It will not be plain sailing in the days ahead. But let me be clear,
you should not underestimate our resolve. We were prepared for the unexpected, and we are equipped for whatever happens.
What we actually learned, though, was the only plan we knew was in place, the emergency budget, is being scrapped. Now no budget at all until there's a new Prime Minister and until the OBR has delivered its autumn verdict on the economy. That's a hell of a fault-fast for the Chancellor, who just weeks ago said there'd need to be an immediate response in order to quell the £30 billion hole growing in the public finances. It was a bad day for British gilts, with yields collapsing below the psychologically important 1% threshold for the first time ever. Sterling also continued its slide downwards, hitting $1.32, down 3.4%. But for Eric Britton, the pound's decline might actually help.
Remember that sterling is overvalued. We've got the largest current account deficit this country has ever seen in all its recorded economic history outside of world wars. For that to be correct, sterling has to fall maybe 20%, maybe 30%.
How significant is the instability that's currently gripped the political situation?
It's very hard to overstate that. At the moment, speaking personally, I don't know who our Prime Minister is. I don't know who our Chancellor is. I don't know if we're in Europe or out of Europe.
Is this what's worrying markets?
Absolutely. I don't know if we're going to have another referendum. I don't know if we're going to have another general election. I don't know who the leader of the opposition is or the shadow chancellor. I don't know any of those things. You couldn't imagine an environment with more political uncertainty than this one. And the shame of it is it's so predictable. We all knew this was coming, knew it was going to be tight, knew it could have gone this way. And yet it appears we have zero plans for what to do in the event that this came to pass as it has. And we're just floundering at the moment. It's utter chaos.
And for markets, that was certainly true, with another stinging session. At one point, Barclays and RBS were suspended because they fell too far, too quickly. Overall, the FTSE 100 closed down 2.6%, but the FTSE 250 fared worse, down 7%. And with more UK earnings, it's seen as a closer bellwether to Britain's economy.
It's been absolutely horrendous. I think, the index over 2 days is down 15%. Actually, are companies that worse off? Have people stopped buying houses, eating out in restaurants or buying cars? I don't think so. But at the moment, fear is everywhere, and fear preys on fear. So if you're a hedge fund manager, it's very easy to go out and short a basket of what we call Brexit stocks, be it house builders, be it motor dealerships, be it sort of Whitbread or whoever. But at the end of the day...
Is that what's going on? You've got lots of speculative trades going on rather than a reflection of the UK economy?
In my view, that is what's happening. I don't think that the UK economy is going to run into a brick wall.
But that is a leap of faith amid the fear and trembling in the city. Not least tonight, after another blow, Britain loses its AAA rating.
Helia Ebrahimi. So what everyone wants to know is, what does this downgrade mean? Our business editor Siobhan Kennedy is here. Siobhan, AAA rating, sounds wonderful. We've lost it.
We've lost it. Well, this is the last agency to cut the UK's credit rating credit score here. To put it in context, it's the first time that since they've been rating the UK in 1978. It's 38 years they've had it as a AAA. This is the first time they've cut the UK.
Big.
That's big. And they've cited, this is the impact of Brexit that we're seeing. They've cited the predictability, the stability and the effectiveness of policy making in the UK. In the short term, what does that mean, John? It means that it will make it harder potentially for the UK to borrow money in the financial markets because it's being seen as less attractive. But more importantly, it's the message that it sends globally to investors that if somehow the UK is seen as being more risky, if you've got a pot of money to spend, you are now less likely to want to spend it here.
So there are other signs and impacts of Brexit today. Give us a sense of that.
Yeah, today we've got our first sense of what a post-Brexit world might look like. Let's take a look. The Institute of Directors carried out a snap survey today of 1,000 of their members, businesses small and big. And it revealed that nearly 2/3 think the vote to leave the EU will be negative for their business. Nearly a quarter said that they would put a freeze on recruitment, and 5% said that they will make redundancies as a result of last week's vote. We saw this morning profit warnings from Foxtons, the estate agent, and from EasyJet sent their shares tumbling. And anecdotally, John, I spoke to one very senior City banker today who told me that every deal he had on the table last Friday is now off the table. I also spoke to a very senior source inside a very large, well-known British industrial business who told me that what we are experiencing now, what he described as a slow-motion crisis.
Well, I know what people sitting on the edge of their chairs are thinking, what about me? What's it going to mean to me?
Well, let's just think about one thing, pensions. When the stock markets gyrate like this, when they tumble, it's very bad for our pensions. I spoke to the pensions minister today. She had this to say: if you do not have to take money out of your pension right now, don't do it. If you absolutely have to do it, do as small an amount as possible. And if you're thinking of buying an annuity to give you a long-term pension money in the future, don't do it now.
Right.
And if possible, work a little longer.
Siobhan, thank you. That's it from this special programme on yet another momentous day for the country. From Matt in Berlin, from Kathy in London, all of us here in Westminster, that's Channel 4 News. Have a great evening.